Hi there, it's Eddie Babbage, and I hope you're getting excited because we're getting close to our upcoming webinar, Timeline Magic for Wedding Planners, hosted by Angela Profit. And as you know, I'm going to be a special guest. And what I wanted to do here is to share another timeline tip with you. And this tip I think can save you a lot of time. So, in order to share this tip, I first want to give you some background. Specifically, I want to tell you what I discovered in my research to be the common workflows that planners have for creating their timelines. As you probably recall, I've interviewed literally hundreds of wedding planners and really studied how they create their timelines. And the first workflow that I observed is what I call the blank slate workflow. And the planners who take this approach actually start every timeline with a blank document. And they do that because they say every wedding is so unique. There's no point in having something already scripted out. Every timeline is different. Now, the obvious downside of this approach is you're recreating the wheel every time you do a timeline if you take this approach. So let's look at workflow number 2. This is the timeline reuse workflow. It's more common than the blank slate approach, and it's especially common in experienced planners who have a lot of timelines in their sort of repertoire. And what they say is, they say, if I have a timeline to do, I try to find a timeline that I did for a past event that was similar. In other words, if I have a wedding that's a Jewish ceremony happening at 5:30 and such venue, I'm going to try to find an old timeline that was Jewish 5:30 ceremony at that venue. And if they can match enough of these sort of attributes, well, a lot of the work is done. But the problem is every wedding is ultimately very unique, and it's very hard to get the stars to align such that you actually have an old timeline that's perfect for an upcoming event. So let's look at workflow number 3, which is actually the most common workflow. It's what I call the generic template workflow. And this is the approach that most planners have. They just have a single generic template. And when they start a timeline, they're going through their contracts, pulling out the relevant information, plugging that into the timeline, moving things around, inserting names, etc. Now, the major downside, the good thing about this approach is you're not recreating the wheel every time from scratch, but you will end up having to do a lot of editing. Why? Because every wedding is unique. So your generic, the keyword being generic, template is not going to be well adapted to each particular event. You're going to have to change the religious tradition, the ceremony time, and when you start changing these things, timelines are complicated. There's a cascade of resulting edits that you're going to have to make for everything that you change. So what I want to show you is a new workflow that can save you a ton of time, that's very strategic. And I want to introduce the concept of taxonomy, which is a word that means the science or technique of classification. And I like to talk about timeline taxonomy. What I mean by that is the idea that you can create a strategic set of timeline templates that are customized for your business. And the idea here is that you can spend a lot less time editing your timelines if you actually start with a better suited template. So you might be wondering, well, how do I get going with this concept of timeline taxonomy? Well, the key is to determine which timeline templates you need. And to do that, you need to look at what I call the driver variables. Okay, the driver variables are the things that actually drive the content and structure of a timeline. So let's look at a few of the most important driver variables. The first one is the ceremony time. If you're like most planners, once you put your ceremony time in, you can work your way back and then come and go back up to the ceremony and work your way forward. This is really sort of the pivotal point of a wedding day timeline. And the ceremony time is typically going to be afternoon or evening, so we'll discuss those cases. Now, you also have a first look, whether or not there's a first look. These days, in roughly half the cases, you'll have one. In another half, they're sticking with tradition and not having one. And that has a big effect on your timeline. The last driver variable is whether or not the ceremony and reception venues are the same or different. Again, depending on the region, I found that in roughly half the cases, they're the same, and the other half, they're actually different. So let's see how these driver variables now allow us to create a strategic set of templates. Okay, let's look at the Christian civil templates for starters. We have an afternoon ceremony case, and within the afternoon ceremony case, we have a situation where there is no first look, and the ceremony and reception venues are the same. And then we have an afternoon ceremony without a first look where the ceremony and reception venues are different. So 2 timeline templates there. And we need 2 more templates because we need a template for an afternoon ceremony with the first look where the ceremony and reception venues are the same. And we need a template for an afternoon ceremony with a first look where the ceremony and reception venues are different. So that's 4 templates to cover the Christian civil traditional weddings with an afternoon ceremony. You've got 4 templates there, and we're going to mirror this sort of same structure for the case of an evening ceremony, right? We want a template for an evening, for the Christian civil tradition. We want a template for an evening ceremony without a first look where the ceremony and reception venues are the same. We want a template where there's an evening ceremony, no first look, and the ceremony and reception venues are different. And then the same thing in the case where there is a first look. So we've got 4 templates here for the evening ceremony for a Christian civil template. We've also got 4 templates that we already covered for the afternoon. So that's 8 timeline templates total. And the idea here is, does it take extra time to create these 8 templates? Yes. But the powerful thing here is, if you create these templates, you're going to save time for the whole lifetime of your business, because every time you have a Christian civil wedding, you're actually going to be starting from a much better place. And on the webinar, we're actually going to go deeper into this concept, and we're going to actually simplify it more. So hopefully it doesn't seem overwhelming, but if it does, just come to the webinar. We will show you how this can be made super simple. We even have a bonus for you. So I really hope to see you on our webinar, Timeline Magic for Wedding Planners, May 23rd at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So I'll see you there.